Mindfulness can influence us in a lot of different ways, not just in who we are and how we are, but in the relationships in our lives. And not just one kind of relationship, but many different kinds of relationships. Welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. My name is Ted Meissner. Thank you so much for being here today. And we're going to explore mindfulness and relationships and learn a little bit about the latest research on that topic. Please do remember to like and subscribe to these episodes, and thank you so much for being here. Our guest today is Heidemarie Laurent. Heidemarie, good to see you again. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and thanks for inviting me, Ted.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And again, it's one of many people that I got to spend time with at a retreat recently. And you are one of just a wonderful cohort of people doing wonderful work in mindfulness. So I want to have you on here to tell us about your work, but I'm wondering if you could just start by saying a few lines about who you are and what it is you do for those who haven't met you yet.
Uh, well, that's always dangerous for a person who is contemplative. I'll say some of what comes to mind, which is I am a person who's been drawn to contemplative practice and sort of that way of approaching the world, I think, since I was young. Was always drawn to understanding things in a lot of different ways and sort of um, landed on psychology as an area where I could explore a lot of different things of, sort of more philosophical, why are we here? Why are we the way that we are? Some of the more, kind of physical science, biological processes, and get really into what is going on underneath the skin to understand what is giving rise to all of this, or at least some part of the machinery that helps give rise to all of this. And then also, how can we care for those who are suffering? And so I went into clinical psychology. Not sure if I wanted to be more on the practice side and really primarily in the helping profession or more at the scientific side. Ended up going into academia again to be able to sample as much as possible. And I think it has been a good field in which to keep developing and having the freedom to develop both that curiosity and that sort of investigative element, and also kind of more the deeper existential, what am I here to do for myself and for others through this role. And so my interests within that have evolved. I started with more of a focus, and that's still part of it, on how do we learn to confront stress in our lives, for better or worse, and especially how do the experiences that we've had in close relationships in our families, perhaps even intergenerational kinds of patterns, how do those shape the way that we experience and move through stress that could lead to things that we classify as disorders? It may not, though, in many cases. And as I continued with that, I became more and more dissatisfied with just focusing on the problem side, and really wanted to do more to say, what is it that we can build to be more resilient, to be able to flourish, even if in the past, maybe past generations or past experiences in one's own life have led to suffering, what could kind of shift that course? And that brought me back to some of my earlier interests in mindfulness and compassion and contemplative traditions. And so, so where that has led me now, and where a lot of my work focuses, is on the role of mindfulness and compassion, whether as a trained set of qualities or just natural variation in those qualities that we all possess. how does that show up in whether in couples relationships or in parent-child relationships, and how does that matter for experiences of connection, but also of moving through stress. And more where I see this moving and where I would like this to go is to go from not just that immediate close relationship, although I think there's a lot there that matters for what we're able to bring to the world, but how those ways that we learn to be in relationship with those closest to us also can kind of move outward into the ways that we relate to others in our communities, in our societies, in our world of both human and I learned that phrase from the retreat we were on, the more than human world, and to really that there are multiple points at which we could have an impact on healing the alienation that so many of us feel from parts of ourselves, from one another, from the world around us, and just that healing potential within that, wherever we're working, whether we're working with a parent, with their child, with an individual, or with some kind of a community group. And so that's a lot of different thoughts, but that gives a flavor of what I'm involved in from my place here in a human development and family studies program now at Penn State University is my kind of current home for doing all of this.
And you're doing this work within the PRISM lab, that's correct.
Mhm.
I wonder if you could say just a little bit about that, maybe how that got started, how you got involved with it.
Yeah. So we often have acronyms for our labs. And I love this one, and it was an intentional choice. So PRISM stands for Personal Relationships, Interpersonal Stress, and Mindfulness. So that encapsulates a lot of what I and the students that I'm working with. So I'm part of this much larger team, and I often, you know, I I am very aware of that. It's takes a village, no matter what, and certainly that I am just one part of this ship that is, a lot of other people. But we chose that acronym, or I chose it with the students that I started this lab with when I was earlier in my academic career. Um, Also because I liked the metaphor of a prism. So I remember when I was learning about different ways of understanding the mind brain, kind of issue of like, are these separate things? Are they the same thing? Can you reduce one to the other? Um, that one kind of way of understanding this that still is compelling to me is the mind being like this source of light that we don't know where it comes from. It is present. We experience it, and the prism is a physical mechanism then that the light passes through and refracts it in a particular way that shows up. And so the qualities of the prism itself, sort of how smooth it is, how the facets are, I suppose I don't know all the physics, but there are physical qualities of the prism that will impact what kind of signal is transmitted. And so similarly that the brain and how the brain is shaped by, again, our early experiences in the womb and, in our development, all of the things that we do and practice and experience in our relationships every day, that will shape the physical, conformation of this brain that is able to transmit this mind signal. And so it does matter to understand like what creates, I don't know if I want to say flaws, but what creates variations in this brain that lead to more suffering, and how we might be able to shift those with experiences or practices or other healing experiences, and also to acknowledge that the source itself is beyond this mechanism that we have, and to not get too precious about, oh, we're going to find everything in the brain and then we're going to have it all figured out. That there's more to it that we can trust in, and so I love it in that sense too, that we're the PRISM lab.
Yeah, and I'm curious about the work, the research that you're doing at the lab around how mindfulness influences the development of relationships. And I'm
Mhm.
curious, what are some of the things that you've found, or some of the ways in which mindfulness can have that kind of influence on relationship development?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I've done some work in romantic partners and looking at how partners confronting conflict, for example, how mindfulness shapes the way that they respond to that. So we've done some work where we bring in romantic partners to the lab and give them 10 minutes to discuss an area of conflict in your relationship, and, just go. And then we, ask them later, what was that like? We also do saliva samples. So we have them give little bits of saliva into a tube that then we analyze for cortisol to look at, kind of stress response, and some other kinds of markers, and see indeed that the kinds of mindfulness qualities, both kind of more trait-like qualities of as operationalized, at least in some of the measures that we have, how that allows both partners to actually kind of have a physiological stress response that seems to relate in turn to greater well-being, less depression, more sort of global well-being. Although part of what has been interesting is when we've been looking at that in couples, we were often looking at opposite sex, identified partners, that different patterns seem to be kind of optimal, or more health related for males versus females. And so to not assume that there's a kind of one size fits all, this is like the healthy stress response, this is how mindfulness is going to matter, that there are different aspects of mindfulness and different ways that that stress response can show up that seem to be pathways to well-being for these different kinds of partners. And not to say sex or gender is the only way that that matters, but that was one dimension. And that also the kind of state mindfulness that partners reported just within the conflict itself also mattered for their stress response, and sort of buffering against what seemed to be more negative or aggressive kind of conflict behaviors during the discussion. So that's kind of one set of things. And then as I moved more into the parent-infant, especially relationship, we've been seeing then how mindfulness qualities in the mother matter for the way that she's responding to her infant, to her own stress response. Again, looking at this physiological stress in relation to like a separation stressor, where the mother leaves the room for a while and the baby's left alone, and there's usually some stress on both sides happening there. But to see how the mindfulness qualities that the mother has really can help to kind of dampen down the stress response, but for both her and her baby, in ways that seem to matter for the baby's development. They were kind of early within the first few years of life, social emotional kind of development scores. And then I guess the other thing that's been salient in the things that we've been looking at is what about mindfulness is mattering for the way that the mother is taking in the baby's cues. And not too surprisingly, for anyone who's practiced mindfulness, it's not so much a like it just makes you kind of not respond to the more negative or distressing parts. that there's a responsiveness to both the kind of more joyful moments and the more upsetting or distressing moments, but that there's more of an even balance at the brain level. So we've done these things where we put the mother in the fMRI, and we play these video clips of her baby in more joy-inducing or more distress-inducing situations, and that the more mindfulness qualities tended to be related to this more even balance of brain response to the joy and the discomfort, and that even then at the level of how the mother interprets different kinds of facial expressions of emotion in babies, that also the more mindfulness qualities in the mother, the more she was able to kind of perceive this balance of more positive and negative emotions, and kind of also a range of ambiguous or mixed emotions in babies, and being able to hold all of that seemed to in turn matter for just the quality of the parenting relationship, and yeah, presumably the well-being of both as they go forward. And right now we're just getting to the close of, and I'm excited to see, although I know enough by this time to know my first ideas about what we'll see are probably not going to be what we actually see. So we'll go through a period of soul searching, but we're just finishing the first intervention study that we were able to do. So far we've done things where we're looking at natural variations in state or trait mindfulness. And in this study, we actually randomized expectant parents to either a mindfulness-based childbirth preparation class or a more standard childbirth preparation class, and then follow them to see both what's going on with the mother's stress and mental health, her sense of bonding with and compassion for herself and her baby, but also then doing some brain scans to see, is there some kind of effect that we can attribute to the mindfulness training itself that is mattering for, her response at multiple levels, and really wanting to help bolster the case for, offering more kinds of supports. I mean, mindfulness as well as other things, but more kinds of supports for families, for parents, as well as, at a broader level. But that this would be a great starting point, because that time when a baby is going to be born is often a time when people are ready to kind of put in the work to be their best self that they can be, and really are caring about, what am I putting into the world? What am I helping to shape for the future? And that it's also a very uniting experience for different kinds of people who might not otherwise see much in common with one another. But this experience of giving birth to a baby and becoming a parent, I see a lot of hope there. And I think some of the power of these classes is not just the mindfulness itself, but it's being in that community with others, and sharing in this kind of more open way, what is the experience of being here as a human.
Yeah. This is so interesting. I just this morning on LinkedIn posted research about mindfulness for preschoolers.
Uh-huh.
And here we are talking about this with it's with babies, even
Mm-hmm.
younger. And what's fascinating for me is the consistency in the ways in which mindfulness helps deal with stressors and
Mm-hmm.
also with the joys, that there's a balancing and moderating effect to that, that it's not about avoidance and suppression of the difficulties. We're actually engaging with that. And
Yeah.
also not really, really grasping on to those happy, pleasant, wonderful moments, but that's there too,
Mm-hmm.
and we still get to fully experience them.
Yeah.
So as you reflect a little bit, maybe a last question for you on how mindfulness, the role it can play, and I imagine
Mm-hmm.
is with the prism metaphor, the several different colors, the different bands that
Yeah.
mindfulness plays in relationship development. Are there some common threads that you've noticed that shows up in how mindfulness helps with the building of healthy relationships? What's that
Mhm.
like? What have you found?
Yeah. I think I will only be able to give a partial answer, which is always the case, and I hope it will keep, you know, becoming more filled in as we go along. But I think both from what I've been doing on the research side and also from my own personal lived experience, and we were talking a little before about, the separation between life and work is in some ways, for me at least, I feel fortunate that they're not separated. And so what I'm exploring in my work, sometimes we joke about me search, but I think it can be very rich and have a feed forward in a positive way of being drawn to what are the big questions for me as a human, and also approaching it in these different ways, and then finding it coming back into, how I approach things in my life and my relationships, or trying to. And so being informed by each of those streams of like the research work, and then also my being in relationship and working with those difficulties, I think there is, with this ongoing practice and intention of kind of being with what is actually here, openly allowing, to move forward with intention um, toward what is the aim that we're able to discern when we have that space to do so. Um, that there's a greater flexibility in how we respond, how we are able to really take in both the highs and the lows of, what it is to be with others and be with ourselves in relationship. And I think beyond that flexibility, there's also just there is a potential for experiencing less separation between what is me and what is not me. And from that place of kind of an expanded sense of self, um, being able to act, or at least as an aspirational quality. And that's part of what I'm really interested in exploring further, is how the way that a healthy self develops, in relationship with others, can be more than just I, me, and mine, but is a much bigger sense of self that allows for so much of the good that we want to experience and see around us, for that to be more natural. And so I have hope for us, and I see how it's possible to move in those directions. And some of it is um, giving giving opportunities for those who are shaping young people um, to practice those qualities of relationship with young ones. Um, and I think we need that as a species. And so that's where I am, is really with the hope and trying to shine a light on at least some part of what is possible for us, um, and trying to make that more accessible.
Yeah, and you bring in this fine quality of mindfulness, not just being introspection, but that it's a team sport. It is within community, within relationships, whether it's romantic relationships or parent-child or friendships or whatever it happens to be, that mindfulness is part of that as well. So for those who are watching, I'm going to have links to more information about our guest today, as well as the PRISM Lab. So you'll find that where links are found on these things. And our guest today, Heidemarie Laurent, thank you so much for being here. Good to speak with you, and thank you for sharing your work with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Ted. I enjoyed talking with you, and anytime.
Relationships can be complicated, interesting, and incredibly fulfilling. And mindfulness can help with all of those different aspects to it. Thank you so much for being here today. And remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. And I'll see you next time on Mindfulness Voyage.